Hello and welcome to This Week in the Triangle. My name is Stephen Horn. I'm an independent journalist here at the Triangle Trumpet. So let's talk about some news stories over the past week. And our first story here is it's almost too crazy for me to believe. I'm not one to often rely on the trope of, imagine if the situation was reversed. But that is really what struck me with this first story. Black only children's bookstore to reopen in black only shopping center. Now, what surprises me the most is not necessarily that this is happening, but just how the mainstream media covers it is what really strikes me. Um, kind of if the situation was reversed, if it was a white only business whose identity was that they were white owned and only featured white authors, and they're opening in a shopping center that catered to white owned businesses and apparently exclusively rents to white owned businesses from what the reporting is, the mainstream media would be asking a lot of questions. They would not be merely reporting on this. So as I researched this story, looking over articles over the past 5 years, that is really what astonished me, is the lack of reporting, the lack of any any interest in digging further, instead just reporting on this as if this is business as usual. So let's get into the story. And the subject of this story is Liberation Station. So this is a bookstore. It has existed as a sort of a pop-up store. It has also previously had a brick and mortar location in Raleigh. Um, so So it was started in 2019 by Victoria Scott Miller and her family as, quote, a pop-up shop specializing in children's literature that centers on Black children and families, with, quote, 113 books by Black authors or Black illustrators. That is what they started with their opening inventory. And that wasn't some fluke, that wasn't some accident. That is their business model. Another quote later on: it will always be a space that houses the narrative of Black children, Black creators, diasporic writers, and illustrators. With our Raleigh location, we are allowing children to walk into a bookstore and learn about their history, their present, and their future, and they can practice possibility. So their business model, and this is a business whose entire business model seems to be based on mainstream media coverage, because it blew up after the death of George Floyd in 2020. They're featured on CNN, Good Morning America, The Washington Post, Oprah Magazine, to name a few. And their whole shtick is that they are a Black-owned business, and they feature, books that are either written or illustrated by Black people. That is their business model. And so, they're featured all over the place. They started a fundraiser to open their brick and mortar location in downtown Raleigh on Juneteenth, 2023. That fundraiser was shared by the News and Observer, shared by Spectrum News, shared by CBS 17. When they're reporting on this story, they're linking to the fundraisers. They're able to raise over $10,000 to open that brick and mortar location. But within a year, they had closed. And what they blamed this closure on was threats they had received, because apparently not everyone who heard about their mission, there's this sort of identitarian business model, was happy about it. And obviously, I don't condone any sort of threats. So Scott Miller told, I guess it was an Instagram post that was reported on by WRAL, that they received numerous threats, including like a disturbing phone call about their children. When WRAL asked the Raleigh police said, "Oh, we haven't heard anything about this. These threats haven't been reported to us." But I'll take them at their word. Obviously they're a very controversial business, considering what their business model is, because this isn't just a Black-owned bookstore. No, this is a Black-owned bookstore that is solely centered around the fact that they are Black-owned, and solely centered around the fact that they only feature Black authors or Black illustrators in what they're selling there. And they appear to have found a perfect location to fit that agenda when they are reopening on Juneteenth, 2026. They have opened another fundraiser So let's get into where they are reopening. It is a place called Montague Plaza, and I believe I am pronouncing that correctly. This is in South Raleigh. This is a 16,000 square foot shopping center, and it was, um, I guess it was created, put together by a black real estate developer. Not my words. That's, I believe, from ABC 11, James Montague. So he opens up this 16,000 square foot facility he built, opened in 2023, and at the time it was reported that all 14 of the commercial spaces in the shopping center were leased to black owned businesses. And if you're thinking, oh, maybe that's just a coincidence, well, let's look at the ABC 11 reporting on the groundbreaking in 2021, described it as, quote, a new gateway for black business ownership, which was, quote, billed as space to ensure black and brown talent can be a part of the growth of the area of RDU. And the funding for this project, F&M Bank put out, I guess, a press release describing their involvement as, quote, supporting black owned business. So apparently this was the business model, this was how they were getting investment. My understanding is that that is illegal, that landlords can't choose to rent to only tenants of a certain race. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm no lawyer, and maybe it's different. I know there's more strict rules for housing. So maybe for commercial, it's completely okay to only rent to black owned businesses. But I know for sure if you opened a shopping center and your mission was to be a gateway for white business ownership or to support white owned businesses, you would be drowned in so many lawsuits, not just from civil rights groups, not just in private. It would be the government suing you. It would be the government shutting you down. It would be the government, not giving you permits. And it would be WREL. It would be the News and Observer. It would be the ABC 11 taking the most critical approach to reporting on your project as possible. But when it is when it's black people doing this for other black people, they report on it as business as usual. And I guess that is really what is somewhat offensive to me, is the hypocrisy. Okay. I don't really care what black people do that much, but this hypocrisy on the part of the mainstream media is one of the reasons why I why I write articles, why I write the Triangle Trumpet, that you can find it at triangletrumpet.news. Because what frustrates me is the hypocrisy here. Um so yeah, if you if you want to go to black owned businesses, you can go to Montague Plaza in South Raleigh, and maybe I'll check it out. Who knows? Maybe I'll go down there with a camera, see what's up, see if anything interesting is going on. And our next story here, also a little infuriating, is thieves target dozens of churchgoers' vehicles at 5 locations. So this was in Raleigh over the weekend, last weekend. I don't know, that's what all of the articles said, over the weekend. I'm not sure if they were just referring to Sunday, because these are 5 church locations that were broken into, some Protestant churches, some Catholic churches, I think even a cathedral, or it's called a cathedral. I don't know if there's any real cathedrals in Raleigh, but Our Lady of Lourdes, Highland United Methodist Church, Holy Name of Jesus Cathedral, Providence Church, and one of the Summit campuses all had break-ins in their parking lots last weekend. The Raleigh police seem to believe that this was the same perpetrators, and there was a video from white mask get out of a black Infinity. He's getting out of the passenger side, so it seems like this is at least a two-man operation. They're breaking windows, stealing stuff. At that location alone, they made off with $2,000 in cash and a handgun. Probably the damage they did to the cars breaking in them was more than what they actually stole. And this is one of the things this goes to show, is that a very small number of criminals is responsible for a lot of the crime, which is why mass incarceration actually works, because people who are in prison can only commit crimes against other people who are in prison. So the more criminals you have in prison, the less crime you have on the street, because crime is not randomly distributed. It is only a few people doing most of the crime. In fact, the people committing crimes in this video more than likely have criminal records from being caught doing crimes in the past, but who knows if these criminals will ever be caught. It doesn't seem like they caught a license plate on the security camera video. So, Raleigh police, their answer to this is, don't keep valuables in your car. Make sure they're locked. But my solution would be to throw more people in prison, to put it mildly. Our next story here, not quite crime related, is related to the county boards of elections. So if y'all are following the news over the past year, after the 2024 election, one of the lame duck bills passed by the GOP while they still had the supermajority was to change a little bit of how the boards of elections, both the county board of elections and the state board of elections, how they are selected. So previously, so basically how it works is that the county party, each county party, the two biggest political parties, that's what's written into the law. It doesn't say Republicans and Democrats, just the two biggest. Their county parties submit a list of 3 names that they propose for the county board of elections. And so the state board picks, for each party, they pick 2 out of those 3 names. But it's a 5-person board. So whoever breaks the tie it used to be the governor. So the governor would appoint the 5th member of that board, the chair. And so for the past, I guess, so two of Cooper's terms, he was the Democratic governor. And so all 100 counties were controlled by whichever party had the governor's seat. And this lame duck bill passed after the 2024 election. Now it is appointed by the state auditor, and what do you know? It was a Republican who won the state auditor's race. Dave Bolliak defeating the incumbent Democrat Jessica Holmes. So they moved this power to an office that a Republican was just elected to, and so, we had some changes. Now all 100 counties will be Republican controlled. Now, a lot of what the county board of elections do isn't really partisan, isn't really too political. They're trying to make sure the elections run smoothly, but they do vote on some key things like early voting. And one thing the Wake County Board of Elections did last election was count a couple votes of dead voters, which is against the law as the law is written, but they didn't like the law, so they said we're just going to count these dead voters anyway. That was the 3 Democrats. At least one of the 2 Republicans was on record saying, hey, we have to follow the law regardless of what we think, but they ignored them. And when people filed complaints with the Democrat-controlled state board of elections, they dismissed the complaints, even though they had reprimanded and they had removed Republican board members for doing probably not even as egregious political things or what they saw as ignoring the law. So there is some aspect of politics that does come into play with the decision that these county boards make. And so with this shift, there's been some changes. So a lot of the county boards did keep on their incumbent Republican board members. So Chatham, Durham, Franklin, Granville, Orange, Vance, and Wake, and the Triangle all kept on their 2 Republican board members. But in Harnett County, they told both of their Republican board members that they would not be needing their services any longer and selected new board members. So the Assembly wrote a whole article on this. They're a bit of a left-leaning outlet, but they also do some good work sometimes. They interviewed a bunch of people in this case. So apparently, there was some inter-party disagreement. One of the incumbent board of election members apparently got into a disagreement with some of the party officials or some people who had their ear, and they said, we don't want them anymore. And so Jim Womack, if you're familiar with North Carolina election integrity stuff, you probably heard of Jim Womack. He's the president of, I believe it is, North Carolina election integrity. I don't remember what the last word in this, but basically, one of the major North Carolina election integrity organizations. He is the president of that. He's been big in that space, and he said, "Hey, I think this guy they got rid of was one of the best, Harnett County Republicans for election integrity." Because the right generally agrees on election integrity, but they don't necessarily agree on what that actually looks like. Um, and what measures they should take to get there. And I think that this kind of illustrates that. So Republicans do now have control of the county board of elections, but what they do with that, what the board members they're appointing do, we'll have to see, because it might not be what all election integrity advocates want. Because once again, not all Republicans view election integrity the same way, and some of them just view. Some of them are a bit Machiavellian in viewing it solely as an avenue for power to create rules that will advantage Republicans and disadvantage Democrats, while other Republicans, are more on the we should do what's right and fair side of things. So we'll see how that partisan shift in control works out. Our next story is on the aftermath of Tropical Storm Chantal. So this was the week before Tropical Storm Chantal hit. There was a lot of flooding, 6 deaths. I believe 4 of those were in the Triangle and 2 were in Alamance County. So this next week, Governor Stein declared an emergency with counties including Chatham, Durham, Lee, Orange, Person, and Wake to, quote, facilitate and support long-term recovery efforts from flooding. So, this is sort of a procedure thing under North Carolina's Emergency Management Act. And so this storm did a lot of damage. In addition to the lives lost in Orange County alone, they estimate that it did $56 million of property damage, including $12.7 million in residential property, $20.7 million in commercial property, and $22.6 million to public property. And so this is, the Eastgate Crossing, Mariacacus Plaza, University Place, these malls or these shopping centers, $17 million damage to them, $3.2 million in damage to Cameron Village, which was, they already knew that was prone to flooding, but they hadn't done anything about it. The town of Hillsborough, $2.3 million just in replacing vehicles lost at the public works facility that flooded. So this was a huge amount of damage, but there have been volunteers coming together to help, such as the school and the historic, mill building, which was flooded, and various fundraisers to support businesses. The community is really coming together to help support people who suffered great damage from this tropical storm. And as a good reminder, if you have never done this, it's a good idea to check your home, your business in North Carolina's flood risk information system. So this is a website run by the North Carolina government, fris.nc.gov. You can look up your property, look up what it says that the risk of flooding at your home is, get an idea, what sort of plans you might need to make in case there is a lot of rainfall at your specific location. And our next story, also out of Raleigh, so there is an arrest of a resident of Raleigh. I'm skeptical to use the term Raleigh man, which the mainstream media, and you'll see why, because this was a $3 million fraud money laundering scheme, which the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation refers to as a, quote, large-scale Moldovan and Russian money laundering scheme. So this is a foreign scheme involving up to $3 million in stolen funds. So basically, the scheme, as they describe it, is that they had websites where they pose as a seller of classic cars. People would send them money for the cars, and they would never send them the cars because they weren't car salesmen. They were actually scammers. So Valentin Verlizanu, 41 years old, was arrested He was jailed in Pender County. That's where he was charged. He was charged with conspiracy, money laundering, obtaining property by false pretenses, and using a government computer to defraud. But he was released on only a $25,000 bond, which seems a little low to me if you're talking about $3 million in fraud. The police are also looking for his brother, Vasile Verlizanu. And that is why we know that this man who was arrested was a resident of Raleigh. um, my gut is telling me that he's not from Raleigh. My gut is telling me that these are possibly foreign nationals, considering this is apparently a scheme involving foreign money laundering. So I reached out to the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. They said, "Oh, we don't know anything about their immigration status." I reached out to the Pender County Sheriff's Office, did not hear back. And this is really one of the things I think the public has the right to know when foreigners are committing crimes. If the government, whatever law enforcement agencies, if any law enforcement agencies are listening to this, if you're arresting a foreign national, that is part of the information you should be putting out so that we can know what kind of crimes are being committed by people who are not Americans, who are not from here. That's just my 2 cents. And so our last story for the week is on the Good Trouble Lives On. So this is another one of these nationwide protests organized by Democrats, by the left wing, in opposition to Trump. If you remember, in the beginning of the year, they had these 51 protests. There was 50 states, I believe, maybe 50 Capitol buildings. And then they had the No Kings protests. And now they had the Good Trouble Lives On, and it appears that the attendance for this one was much lower than the previous No Kings protests, which was definitely in the thousands across all the Triangle locations. This they had 9 locations listed in the Triangle in Cary, Chapel Hill, Durham, Hillsborough, Morrisville, Pittsburgh, Raleigh, Smithfield, and Wake Forest. But they only had 300 protesters in Raleigh, which is not that great of a turnout compared to their previous protests. So perhaps this is winding down, or perhaps they're maybe they just didn't advertise this one as well. Perhaps everyone was busy. So I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen with these, because other anti-ICE protests have involved some vandalism, illegal activity in Raleigh and Durham, and they had scheduled some of these protests for in the nighttime, as it was getting dark, 7, 8 p.m. So I wasn't sure. That is one of the tactics that some of these radical left-wing organizations use when they're planning for things to turn ugly. But apparently this was still, kind of normie Democrats, a lot of left-wing organizations sponsoring these rallies. So I actually covered the one in Wake Forest, took some pictures and some video. So I have some pictures here that I put out. One thing I noticed is that there were quite a number of them flying the American flag. These are mainly older white people in attendance, and I didn't get the same feel as I had at other protests where it seemed like they were just flying the American flags because they realized that it looked bad when they weren't flying the American flags. But here it was just American flags. I didn't see any foreign flags. There are about 100 people at this rally. Resist, some signs and whatnot. A couple pride flags, but even more American flags than pride flags. And the topics that the speakers talked about, a little interesting. The first speaker was probably the most radical. She was talking about how capitalism was bad. Other speaker was talking about saying Trump was taking away voting rights, saying that Trump was targeting women by taking away Social Security. About half the crowd raised their hand when they were asked if they were on Social Security, which is probably a big driver for a lot of these attendees, is that this idea that Trump is going to cut Social Security is sort of a big fear point for people who are on Social Security. But I think what a lot of them don't realize is that the Social Security fund is running out of money. Your Social Security is going to be cut. The question is, Do we cut it now, or will it cut itself when the fund runs out? And I believe it'll drop to 75% of the current payout, because the current input output levels are not sustainable. More money comes out of the fund every year than goes in. And that switch happened over the last couple years, where they just don't have the rates right. They don't have their actuary tables set up correctly, so that the people are maybe they're not dying soon enough, but the money in isn't replacing the money coming out. I think this is really one of the unfortunate things in politics, is that anyone who suggests, hey, we need to do something about this, is just viciously attacked. So there's kind of a bipartisan consensus that they're not going to solve anything with Social Security. They're just going to let it hit this economic wall that's coming in just a couple years. These aren't my projections. These are projections of the Social Security Administration. The projections that they're doing, saying, hey, we're going to run out of money. But yeah, unfortunately, anyone who touches that immediately gets attacked, and then very effective attacks, because for a lot of people that is what they're living off of, and it's going to really hurt them when it runs out of money, which it is going to do, whether anyone likes it or not. But uh, back to the protests, or getting off of that aside, they're also talking about Trump cutting abortion, basically framing a lot of Trump's, even the idea that he's cutting Social Security, framing that as a women's issue. And then also a lot of talk about anti-ICE activism, encouraging people to tell illegals their rights. Also in terms of the Fourth Amendment, that ICE agents are allowed to go to public areas of a business, but they need permission to go to private areas. So trying to encourage people, any business owners, to protect illegal immigrants, and also encouraging people to report any ICE sightings to some of these radical leftist groups that are tracking ICE. Hopefully most of that is only for the purpose of allowing illegal immigrants to evade law enforcement, but unfortunately those may also be used in the violent attacks on ICE agents that we have seen. But that's the kind of stuff that was talked about at this particular protest location in Wake Forest. Once again, I believe there is over 1,000 nationwide, and something like 9 locations here in the Triangle. And I think probably the most important possible takeaway from this is what is going to happen in the midterms. Do the Democrats really have people fired up? Are they going to get all these people out there volunteering, hitting the streets? Are they going to be able to get a good turnout for the midterm elections? Because that just having people gather in front of the town hall, probably not going to change much. What really matters is the electoral outcomes, because that is actually what democracy looks like. Democracy does not look like people going out in the street no matter how much they chant, "This is what democracy looks like." Democracy actually looks like going to the ballot box and voting, and that is really when we'll see how serious this movement in opposition to Trump really is. So this has been Stephen Horn with This Week in the Triangle. I'm a journalist here at the Triangle Trumpet. That's my publication where I publish independent journalism about news in the Triangle area of North Carolina. You can find that at triangletrumpet.news. That is triangletrumpet.news. And if you've been listening to this live, thank you for tuning in.